Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsome with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the Canes for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6.
Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right.
Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag.
Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart.
Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown! They are throwing a play through left-handed. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Theo at the 35. Theo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. Your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And tonight, coming at you live on a Friday night, just 15 days away from the start of the Tar Heel football season over there in Ireland. And with that, we are getting closer and closer to the end of training camp. Bill Belichick sort of confirmed that today when he spoke to the media, that preparations for TCU are around the corner. And that training camp is winding down, which means that a lot of battles are going to be solved here in the next couple of weeks. And we're here to talk about some of those battles here tonight. We're also here to discuss some, other notes that came out from today's practice. Today was the third practice that the media was allowed to be at. So really just talking about battles going on throughout the entire roster. But there are some main ones that I wrote an article about a couple of days ago that I think we have even more clarification on in some cases outside of maybe the quarterback battle. And maybe we'll save that for last year. We'll talk more about the other position groups and some of the other starters that look to be emerging there. And then we'll finish up tonight with the quarterbacks, which is what everybody wants to hear about. And certainly some positive stuff coming out today. And it looks like things may be leaning in one direction as we go here throughout camp. But Josh Barlow alongside of me here. I think one of the things that we can definitely tell from listening to a lot of the people that have been around the program, a lot of the people that have been out at practice, there seems to be a buzz starting to generate more so than there was in the spring. And I think part of it is that they've been able to view practice a little bit more. They've gotten more of a feel, I think, for this team here over the last few weeks than they did back in the spring. And, of course, we're getting towards the start of the season as well. So just in general, it feels like people around these teams get more optimistic as we get closer and closer to the season. But I think it really does feel night and day from where we were coming into last year. I think there's a quiet confidence that things are closer to where they need to be coming in this time. And, last year, I think we might have all been blinded by the fact that it was going to be the spectacle in that game against TCU. That was something that maybe we overlooked some of the issues that this team was going to have with all the guys that came in spring and were projected starters, or all the guys that came in after spring and were projected starters. This year, It's just feeling a lot different, and it feels like as we get closer and closer inside Carolina, Tar Heel 24/7, it feels like there are more glowing reviews than I at least expected going into the season.
Probably a reflection of the message that Carolina conveyed at ACC kickoff is accurate, which is they're further along in their process. This is a group that's closer together on and off the field, and they're probably better equipped to handle some of the off the field distractions that they've had to endure with Michael Lombardi being placed on administrative leave. Your defensive coordinator is on medical leave. But when you've got more structure, when you've got more stability in your program, while it's not ideal, you can still navigate those types of situations. And that's what they're having to do right now while trying to get prepared for a season opener that, we know the Belichick mantra, one game at a time, one play at a drive, one play at a time, all that. They know how important that TCU game is. Like, if we as the fan base recognizes how important that game is and what that game could represent for the remainder of the season, it's not lost on that coaching staff. It's not lost on that locker room that they probably feel the same way. And no, there isn't the circus that was there last year when you opened up against TCU in a special setting. That one was on the Monday night. This one's in week 0. But look, College Game Day didn't even value going over there. And we've seen Game Day go to Ireland before in week 0 to celebrate the start of the college football season. You're not getting that. I'm not sure we know which broadcast crew that's going to be calling the game. It's not going to be Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. There's not going to be a game day special leading up to the game. It's just we're going to sit down, and at 12 o'clock they're going to kick a football off. And their job is to be ready to be as ready to go as possible, because I do think that game is a lot more winnable than the betting public is thinking. If you look at certain betting markets, you got like 93% of the money on this TCU team. And this isn't the TCU team that is returning a bunch of starters after going to the national championship game. They've got to replace their quarterback. They've got questions they got to answer as well. And so I know I'm ready. I'm about as excited as I've been all off season long, because I think we're going to be better. I think we're going to be more competitive, and that starts in just about 15 days.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're hoping, right? You're hoping that first game doesn't go as bad. And I truly believe that later in the season, this team will be better because they are so young. But you just can't start as bad as you did last year. It just can't be non-competitive. Even if you do end up losing, I know right now it's 7.5. I believe it's up to 7.5 now. Point favorite for TCU. Even if Carolina gets beat by that margin, and let's say they're staying relatively close, at least give you a feel entering the fourth quarter that if they string together a couple of drives, they could win the game. I think most fans would probably take that. And you got Clemson, you got Notre Dame early. We'll go through the schedule before the season starts and give you our official record predictions and everything like that. But I think that as you get closer and you start hearing that certain position groups are maybe looking a little bit better than once thought. Today I thought one of the position groups that we've talked about that you probably, I don't know if you have a ton of concern around it, but you do sort of wonder what exactly things are going to look like for a guy like Peyton Seelman. He was raved about today by his head coach. And we've seen this before, and maybe this is a guy that doesn't, end up succeeding for Carolina the way we think he is. But I think Bill Belichick knows good football players, especially on the defensive side of the football. So if he's telling you that a guy is standing out, a guy is doing things that he needs to do, and he feels like it's going to translate, then I think there's a good chance that it does end up translating. And so I think as we get closer, I've started to become a little more excited as well. It's probably added a win, maybe 2 to my expectations from when we first got the schedule. And you guys will just have to wait and find that out once we get closer to the start of the season. But I will say that the more positivity that I hear around the team itself, I think, it's going to be easier to block out. Like, first of all, it's a lot different than I think last year. Last year, in the offseason, there was such an onslaught of just never-ending storylines off the field. At least with this, I hate the timing of the Michael Lombardi stuff. Definitely hate the timing. And, doesn't really matter when it is, but especially hate the timing for Steve Belichick right as the season gets ready to begin. Not saying it's a distraction, really just hate it more for him than anything. But I do think it's been less. And I think there's been more focus on football. And I think that's something that's a little bit comforting. There is a little bit more of a focus on the football field this time around, as opposed to what exactly is going on off the field. And so, there's a lot of different things that we've been watching, or watching for reports on here during fall camp. And we're here to talk about some of those tonight because, there really are a lot of position battles that I think are really, really interesting on both sides of the ball. To me, I think the side of the football that you got to start with is defense, because that's where you've got most of the position battles that I think are still up for grabs, at least amongst the starters. We'll talk about some of the ones maybe a little bit further down the depth chart, probably not as in-depth. I mean, the starter battles are the ones that you're going to look at the most, but there are some ones on the offensive side a little bit further down the depth chart. Most of the starters, it feels like, are pretty much slotted in. Coming into today, I still thought there were some battles that were going on. I thought particularly edge rusher, Jalen Harvey, Donovan Hoylett, that would be probably a battle that was still going on. To a certain extent, weak side linebacker, although I don't think that was really that much of a battle. After even last week, I think Derek McDonald probably sealed that up. But the real ones that we're keeping an eye on are in the secondary. I think those are the ones that really stand out the most. But let's start with edge rusher. I think at this point, again today, Jalen Harvey running with the ones, according to those that were out there at practice. Donovan Hoylett was seen out there today. He is the guy that is behind, it appears, Milcart Abujide at one of the rush end positions. And so it feels pretty safe at this point to say that as of right now, I think you'll see both guys at some point during the season opener. We've heard from, Andrew Jones back in the summer that he thinks that Hoylett could be a guy that's moved around and used in a versatile role playing inside at certain times. But it seems right now that when the team takes the field over in Dublin, it is going to be Jalen Harvey, a guy who has made some leaps this year, comes over from Penn State. There are a lot of people that believe that if he had stayed at Penn State, he would have been a starter there for them this season. And really the biggest thing that we've heard about him is just the explosiveness that he brings to the table. And it seems like that's shining through here in the last few weeks of camp.
It's a really good sign that the Penn State guy beat out the FCS guy. And I don't want to diminish the player that Hoylett is, but how there have been times that we've seen in the past where Carolina's gone through the route of getting a player from a big time program and not being able to develop that talent. And if you're starting at Penn State, whether it's with Matt Campbell's version or even James Franklin's version, that probably says to me you're gonna be an NFL draft pick at some point in the future. And so that's just how I view edge rushers at Penn State. You expect those guys to be drafted. Sometimes they go very, very high. But Belichick raved about him last week. I think it was after Noah Weisskopf asked him a question, and he spoke for about 2 minutes about how explosive he is and how quick he is and how physical he is. And we talked all off season long about trying to find that pass rusher opposite Milcart Abujide to make life easier on him. And it appears that Carolina has found that, and finding it now means that, okay, as you start to put together the game plan for TCU, you can kind of go in understanding, hey, you don't need to split reps because you're still trying to figure out who your guy is. You understand that these are going to be your starting edges. But as you mentioned with what Adrian Jones wrote about Hoylett being able to play inside, well, now you could start tinkering with that at this part in the year. Whereas last year it felt like we didn't get certain answers until a middle halfway to the year, and then they were able to start getting a little bit more creative and trying to get the most out of the personnel. That's the most important thing about, you want these battles to play out. You don't want to rush to a conclusion, but the quicker you get answers is the quicker that you can really start to maximize your personnel across the board. And so I think this gives this defensive line a really good chance going into this game against TCU to have a greater impact, because they're not going to have to be rotating these guys every other drive, every other play. It feels like as of right now, if the season started today, they knew who their top two pass rushers are. And, when you give a Belichick, whether it's Bill or Steve, that kind of answer this early on, and that they're starting to work on the game plan, it could really set up for this defense to have a successful day against that TCU offense.
Yeah, I think that's what you're really hoping. I mean, for Carolina, I think it's really going to start with winning on first and second down, slowing down that run game for TCU. But we saw it last year, man. I know the run game ripped off some big carries at certain points during the game for TCU. It really felt like they were just picked apart in the secondary. And part of that was that they just weren't getting pass rush. Yes, you can put some of it on guys like Marcus Allen just having tough nights in coverage. But I think a lot of it, if you're able to generate a pass rush right off the bat, then I think you're feeling much better. And the thing that I will say is that you had a Penn State transfer last year. People would say, well, what happened with that guy? He didn't end up really living up to the expectations that we had. I think, first of all, the expectations for Smith-Vilbert were probably a lot lower. Jalen Harvey is a guy that's still relatively young. You feel like he is a guy, I think he's a junior, but even still, there is more upside to him. I think Smith-Vilbert was a finished product when you got him last year. Wasn't that much of an edge rusher, or wasn't that much of a pass rush specialist. Was really someone that I thought showed up at times in the run game for Carolina. And that's an area that I think you do have to worry about a little bit with Jalen Harvey. Is he going to hold up in the run game? But I think for the most part, you're hearing what you want to hear from a pass rush perspective. And I think even without Kendall Briles as their offensive coordinator, I do think TCU is still going to be a team that's going to throw the ball a fair amount to start the season. I think, yes, they do sort of have a question mark at quarterback. They know who their guy's going to be, but it's Jaden Craig coming up from Harvard to take over as the starter there. I think they like Jaden Craig, and I think they're going to show that in the opener because they're going to let him spin it a little bit. And so Carolina is going to have to get after the quarterback. There's going to be a lot of attention on Milcart, and so someone has to step up. It's good to hear that Jalen Harvey is the guy that is stepping up and showing what he needs to. This doesn't feel like a position where you have to roll somebody out there to start the season. And this is just the best of the group. It feels like he's really earned this. And so I'll be intrigued to see, exactly what he looks like. And the other thing is let's say he really does struggle and he's getting pushed around. Well, the good news is you can always turn to Hoylett and see if he's going to be any better. I think that there are going to be some rotational reps played by Hoylett in this opener. And so that's a position that I feel pretty good about. I do think one other note about the edge rushers that I found intriguing is it looked like the second team guy again as an edge rusher was Calvin Thomas. So that's one of the true freshmen that I think really is starting to pique my interest a little bit. Haven't heard a lot about him in the podcast that I've listened to from Tar Heel 24/7. Definitely, inside Carolina, haven't heard that name pop up that much, but it is certainly interesting that he has made that conversion and is already appearing on the 2 deep. I think that is definitely someone to watch out for early on in the season, potentially making an impact. You go to that linebacker level. Peyton Seelman was never really a guy that I thought had to battle for his job. I think he's going to be the starting Mike, could play, the will linebacker as well. I think it's going to be rather interchangeable between him and Derek McDonald. I think Seelman, probably a guy you want out in coverage a little bit more based off of some of the stats he had last year in coverage. But regardless, whatever position Derek McDonald was battling for, it looks like he has won that position. Jonathan Agamadu, I thought, was a guy that really got some nice buzz back in the spring. And I thought that was a legitimate competition coming into the fall. And I'll stick by that. I still think it was. But I really think that Agamadu hasn't really been talked about that much, which kind of makes me wonder, has he been able to carry things over? While Derek McDonald, I think, has really just done the things that he's needed to do. He's a guy that's appearing like he's, one of the leaders for this group. And this is a group that I've heard some of the reviews of it. It felt like in the spring, people were a lot more concerned about this unit than they are now. Now, I think there is some belief that this is actually going to be a pretty solid group, a pretty solid tandem. And I think Derek McDonald, a year removed from an injury that cost him a decent amount of last season, feels like he's healthy, feels like he's ready to go. And I think he could be a big piece for Carolina out of the gate in that game against TCU.
Yeah, this was the linebacker room I envisioned after Carolina went to the portal to get both of these dudes. You still got to see Seelman at the power conference level, but there's, I think he's just a football player. Like, I think that's a guy that, whether he's got the athletic testing speed or not that you maybe want at the position, I think that's a guy. Doesn't matter. You put the tape on, dude's gonna make plays. He's gonna be around the ball. I think the McDonald one was the one that you had to figure out. Like, is this closer to the guy we saw a few years ago at Syracuse? Or is this a guy that, got injured, lost his job, and wasn't the same player for the Orange that he had been previously? If you get the guy from a few years ago and you pair these two together and your defensive line is better than it was a year ago, and they're doing what they need to do for your two guys to get downhill and make plays, then all of a sudden this front seven looks very formidable. And it looks like the type of front sevens that I think you would expect from a Belichick-led defense. And I think that can't be overstated enough, just how important that is, because you do have some questions maybe in the secondary, but if you have this stuff cleaned up now, then it gives you a greater chance or not. Because you go back to last year in the opener, like, yeah, you could see the plays that you thought you could see, a Simpson make or a Kamori House make, but those guys also made some mistakes that ended up hurting Carolina. You mentioned some of those big runs. A lot of those were they missed assignments, and those were backbreakers. But if you've got that cleaned up, and you have to make you have to throw it 45, 50 times to beat you, I think that favors Carolina more so than if they can kind of run, if they want to run it, throw it when they want to throw it. So this was what I was wanting the linebacker room to be. It's good that it's kind of played out that way, because now you can really start trying to develop some depth there, because I think you're going to need at least 4 guys to play, and there not be a significant drop off when Seelman or McDonald are on the field. But I think that's one of the reasons why confidence is starting to grow, optimism is starting to be abound, is that it does look like this front seven this time of the year in a much better spot than it was this time last year.
Yeah, and I mean, you go back to that opener, and I think part of it was, a young guy in Leroy Jackson that was being thrust into his first significant action. I think that was part of it. I think you also saw Isaiah Johnson having to play some of the most snaps that he had to play a year ago. Both of those guys are back this year and now know what it's like to play significant snaps. I thought it got better as the year went along. And so I think that's really where it starts. Now, the thing is, you're concerned, I think, you have to take those guys out of the game. I know that you're starting to see, and it showed up again apparently today, that the redshirt freshmen are the guys that are showing out at the backup D tackle spots. And Nico Maggio, a guy that Carolina added late last year in their recruiting class, and Trey Giddens, another guy that was in a similar circumstance. And so to those guys, I mean, credit to them. It feels like they've stepped up. I would imagine that's the case because Trayshawn Ruffin, Viliami Mawala, Vodney Cleveland, a lot of those guys are further down the depth chart. They're running with the 3s and the 4s. And so it seems like those redshirt freshmen have stepped up. Maybe this is the homer in me. I'm going to choose to believe that those guys stepped up and that it's not the true freshmen have struggled that badly. Now, maybe I'm proven wrong, but I do think that you feel good about that group. And so the linebackers, I've become more encouraged as we've gone along. I think Seelman was a guy that when they got him out of Richmond, I really liked. I know that he wasn't perfect against Carolina when they played a year ago. I still thought he was really pretty solid. I know Hoylett was the guy that really disappeared in that game to the point where I thought, yeah, that might be a guy that you worry a little bit more about. Seelman, I think he'll translate to this level. It's there some of the teams that have more speed, some of the teams that are a little more physical, like Miami, like Louisville. Yeah, maybe those teams end up bothering him. But I do think that he will be a guy, especially, teams like TCU. He might actually be able to show you that he's got something for those teams. And then McDonald, I think one thing that we probably don't talk enough about with him is the level of motivation. Guys last year, I don't know how much motivation there was for Kamori House, especially as the season went along. I think he felt entitled that he was a guy that was going to be given the role, where I think with one of the positives of getting a guy like Derek McDonald, he wasn't a starter last year. And so for him, he knew I have to earn, in order to get a starting job back, I've got to earn it. And it feels like from what people have said, he's been able to do that. So I feel more confident in that group as we go along. And we'll see what it looks like over there in Ireland. It's just make sure that you guys don't miss as many tackles as they did early on in the season last year, and I think you'll be fine. Then you move to the secondary. It seems like Jaden Patterson pretty locked up at this point as a boundary corner. That's going to be the position that he's going to play. I feel pretty good about the fact that Greg Smith is going to be a star of this group. Now, what you classify as a star, I think is important, but I think he's going to be the best player at this level of the defense. I like Jaden Patterson, but I really do think that Greg Smith is going to be that good. And some of the reports are seeming to back that up. Where he's going to play is interesting because I think he can play either field safety or boundary safety. I would rather boundary because I'd like him closer to the line of scrimmage based off of what he did last year as sort of a hybrid linebacker safety combo. But either way, we'll make it work. Then you get to the star position. That seems like that's going to go Caleb Costway. Ade Willie is going to be the guy that's probably going to end up backing him up, and you'll see him a decent amount as well. That's the position that he played at Michigan State. Now you get to the field corner and the second safety spot. That's where you have the battles going on. And last week we heard two new names that popped up and really took over those jobs. And those guys are still in those roles, apparently, as of today. Trey Miller, that was a guy that Bill Belichick talked about today and talked about how many strides he's made throughout this offseason. Talk glowingly about the plays that they've seen him make out there and some of the areas that he's gotten better. I think at this point, pretty safe to say that this late in camp, 2 weeks you've now been out there with the ones, I feel pretty confident in saying that he's probably going to be the starter for Carolina when they go over to Ireland. How do I feel about that? That's a little bit different. I don't think I feel as confident as I do about some of the other spots. This was a guy that allowed 14 of 15 targets to be caught last year for 153 yards. He's going to be out there. He's going to have to be a lot better. Now, that was a decent amount of that came playing in the slot. But if he's going to be on the outside, he is going to have to find a way to compete for balls a little bit better than he did a year ago. He's going to have to be a guy that limits some of the production on the outside, limit those big plays. And I think that's going to be really the key for him. I feel better about Peyton Waters at safety because I liked some of the flashes that we saw from him last year. But even that, I'm not pounding my chest over either of those two spots.
Yeah, the concern around Trey Miller is, you mentioned the completion percentage last year, not being able to make plays on the ball. You have to wonder how much of that is the fact that he's 5'10". Like, he's small. Is he going to be better? Like for me, I think it's all about being in the right spot, making sure your technique is right, making sure that you don't open your hips the wrong way. Like everything. Like for me, it feels like he's going to have to play. I'm not going to say perfect, but he's going to have to probably play above his head as compared to what we saw a year ago. But we haven't seen him. Obviously, Belichick and the defensive coaches have. And that's why I guess we're sitting here, as you said. I think this late into training camp where the competition portion is kind of winding down, he'll more than likely enter that game against TCU as the starter. And then maybe you'll have to see how that performance goes. To see if he kind of solidifies that position as the season does move along. I think, when you look at the Peyton Waters situation, I think that's where you mentioned, like, if Greg Smith is the guy that you're talking about him being, which is the best defensive player in the backfield. He's just solid. Is always in the right spot, always at the right time. You can probably maybe hide Waters a little bit. Maybe as he gets up to speed, no matter what it is. But it's why you can't have like two question marks back there, right? You can't have two liabilities. Because you can try to scheme and hide a guy that's maybe not a depth back there, but it's still the best person qualified to be playing at that other safety spot. So that's going to be, I think, when we start previewing the actual game and the matchups, I think these are going to be two names we're going to talk about. You would expect a coach like Sonny Dykes to maybe want to challenge those guys early and often to see just what those two guys have to offer. Best way to combat that, let that defensive line have constant pressure on the quarterback. Like, that's why it's the ultimate team game, because it doesn't matter if you've got 4 All-Americans back there. If you don't got a pass rush, they're going to get picked apart. They're going to give up plays. So it's kind of where we were this time last week. You feel really good about one half of the defensive backfield. The other half, we won't be able to really tell you how we feel until we see them on the field in game action. And luckily, or maybe unluckily, that's just 2 weeks away now.
Yeah. And this is probably the unit that you would wish you had a little bit more time. But I mean, with Waters, I'm not afraid that he's going to kill you. I didn't think that he did that last year. Remember, he played a decent amount of snaps in that game against TCU. And I thought that at times he was probably the best option for you in that game. Now he's had even more time in this system. Now, the counter argument to that is, what system is this? I would assume that things are going to remain relatively status quo. I don't think there's going to be massive changes. I know that you've got Bill Belichick, who's probably going to be handling the play calling. A little bit of help from Bob Diaco, who might run things a little bit differently than Steven Belichick ran it. But I do think for the most part, these guys are not having to completely adjust to a different play caller. And so I think that, for Peyton Waters, he's probably made some good strides over the last year and a half. And so he's probably a guy that now projects a lot better than even he did a year ago or even did back in the spring. And so he's one that I think I have a quiet amount of expectations for him as the season starts. Trey Miller, I don't know what to feel about him. That one I'm scared about. And I think we're going to find out a lot about that position in the first game of the season, because you better believe that will be the position that they are going to pick on the most. Yeah, they might try to, find some things in the middle of the field, attack the seams a little bit if they believe that Peyton Waters is a weakness as well. But I really think they are going to go after Trey Miller, Jalen Thompson, whoever is out there, Ade Willie, if he's the guy that's out there as well. Whoever that guy is, I think they are going to attack that side of the field, and we'll see how these guys hold up. The thing that I would tell them, if I was Belichick, I would say, hey, it can't be much worse than it was last year in the opener in terms of a guy being attacked on that side of the field. It's just, let's see how you sort of adjust to that as the game goes along. And I think that's one that will get better as the season goes along. It's just about who ultimately emerges there. Another guy that has shown some signs at that field corner position, but is a little bit further down on the depth chart, but a name to keep in mind as the season goes along, Kenton Dobson, the true freshman. I think that certainly is a name that is starting to generate a little bit of buzz here as we come towards the end of camp, but similar to what we'll talk about with Travis Burgess, maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent, but I do think it is just a little too late for him to be a huge factor in that season opener ultimately for Carolina. All right, let's shift over to the offensive side of the football. That's where I wrote down when I had the position battles article that I wrote, which you can check out on the website for a little more information. I wrote down right tackle as still being a battle. I think it's safe to say, again, after today, when Bill Belichick spoke to the media, and again, a guy that he was asked about and sort of raved about was Jaquan McRoy. I think now it's pretty safe to say that he's going to be the starter for Carolina in that first game of the season. They absolutely love his size. I don't think that there's any concern about his size being bothersome for whatever quarterback is back there. We heard that last year. You had a quarterback that was right at 6 foot, if not a little below 6 foot, in Gio Lopez. Billy Edwards Jr., not super tall, but it feels like for the most part, most people don't think that's going to be an issue for the quarterback, whoever it is this season, especially if it's Miles O'Neill. That's not going to be any issue for him. Even if it's Travis Burgess, he's also very tall, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. There's some quiet confidence around McRoy, not only from the coaching staff, but from the people that cover the team. And again, I think a lot of it, you haven't seen him in team situations, but I do think a lot of it is just them watching him go through drills, them looking at the size that he brings to the table, and the fact that he has now been the starter for Carolina with that one group for the first 3 weeks that they have been out there. This is one right along with the linebacker spot that I talked about where Derek McDonald was battling. it's safe to say this one is over. Shaq McRoy has won it. Aiden Buchanan needs to be ready just in case they need him at some point this season. But it feels like Jaquan McRoy is the guy that they are putting in pen to start that opener, and they feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, you mentioned the size. You got to love it. 6'8", north of 330 pounds. I don't think the fact that, he was in the Arkansas system previously probably played a role as well. Much more familiar with what his job is to do. And you feel a lot better having a bigger quarterback back there as opposed to Gio Lopez, because it was kind of odd the way that Carolina went about putting those two massive tackles. And then you had a smaller quarterback. We've seen it in the NFL, but you see it where they build up big in the interior. Like that's what the Panthers have done with Bryce Young. Not that their tackles are small by any chance, but you typically build your interior up when you've got a small quarterback. Carolina last year did the exact opposite. We still got to see how it plays out. We still got to see what McRoy does ultimately look like in a Carolina uniform. I do expect this offensive line to be better just across the board a year ago, because I think you've got an offensive play caller, you got an offensive coach that's going to be able to adapt to the strengths of what his offensive linemen are good at. And I think they'll be much better across the board, just plugging them into what they want to do. And look, this is a wide zone. It's a blocking scheme that's usually an easier concept in terms of what you got to do. So I'm with you. You got to have Aiden Buchanan ready to go, just in case injury or just a lack of performance. But you get in that position battle wrapped up as you get ready to start putting your install in for your game plan. You like that. And I think that bodes well for an offense that will try to find its footing for the first time under Bobby Petrino in a unique setting across the pond against a Big 12 opponent.
Yeah, and I like betting on, and it's no offense to Aiden Buchanan, but Aiden Buchanan was a guy that was a late ad last year, was a low-end 3-star. I like coming out of the gate betting on a guy that was a 4-star prospect, was recruited to Oregon as part of what has been a complete shift to the Big Ten style that Oregon has been trying to, adjust to since they made the move, even a little bit before that, trying to compete with some of the teams in the SEC. They were looking for really talented offensive linemen and really physical offensive linemen. And it feels like that's where Shaq McRoy is. Played a little bit at Arkansas last year, not a lot. And Belichick admitted that today. That one thing is that a lot of his, what you see from him is developmental. It's not something that you can go back and watch on film at previous stops. But I do think that, some of the things that really stuck out about what Belichick said is good work ethic, good attitude. You like that. Not saying that guys didn't have that on the offensive line last year, but that's a big part of it. It's just being someone that is wanting to work hard, someone that is willing to do whatever it takes. Some of the things that, he did mention, he's still working on some things. He mentioned pad level, leverage, pass protection, blitz pickup. So I wonder if he's going to be one of those guys that maybe you're going to worry about a little bit more as a pass protector, maybe shines a little bit more as a run blocker. Think that's probably what you're going to see from him early on. But hey, what we're being told, and we'll talk about the running back here in just a second, what we're being told is that they feel a lot better about these running backs than they felt coming into last year. And they believe that this group is going to be better this year. So if Carolina can run the ball and run it more consistently than they did last season, and especially as they got towards the end of last year, early in the season, I thought there were moments where they ran it well, but part of it was that I think they were just keeping teams on their toes because they were throwing so many different guys out there that teams didn't know what to prepare for. It felt like once teams started to get the book on each guy, that it became obvious what they were going to do, and it was tough for Carolina to run the ball. I think there's going to be more explosion from this group this year. I think there's going to be more of an attention to try to run it on the edges instead of just running it straight up the middle every single time, running it in those A and B gaps, and just hoping that you can break one loose. I think, that's going to be contingent on what you see from a tight end group that they really like, and these two tackles. But I think there is more confidence as we go along. The other guy on the other side of McRoy is Jordan Hall. Even more positivity seems to be coming out about him. He was a guy that was raved about last week, and now he went up there and spoke to the media today, and there were some still glowing reviews from those that were out at practice about what they saw from Jordan Hall here in these last couple of weeks as well. So I feel like that group's in pretty good shape. What's weird is that as we've gone along, I think there's confidence in Aiden Buchanan. There's some confidence in Christo Kelly. I think it's sort of have to see it to fully believe it, but there are some people that feel good about him. Andrew Threet, I've heard some people that are saying they're in full wait and see mode with him, having transitioned from Charleston Southern. Also, when he was there, wasn't great at the left guard position, was better as a tackle. So I think that's also interesting. And then the biggest concern is depth along the offensive line, especially at center. If there's an injury, if Christo Kelly gets banged up, there is basically a full panic that will ensue in a lot of people's minds, because you're having to trust a true freshman in Will Conroy, that he's going to go out there and really put together what you need consistently. I think that's where the worry is. But I think these tackles, man, I said coming in to fall camp, I was pretty nervous about this group. And just the offensive line as a whole, I'm starting to feel more confident that this group is going to be better than last year. We're back in the spring. I was really sold on them probably being as bad, if not worse, than a year ago.
Yeah, I think, just an intentionality to just go and get more physical. And it's one thing to recruit, the size, and I talk about that a lot, or the weight, but you also got to play with that. And like it's one thing to have it, but you gotta utilize it. And it really, to me, like that's got to be a culture thing. Like that's got to be something that your strength and conditioning coach and your position coach are banging down the drum every single day, that we want to be the most physical football team out there. And you see a lot of teams that you can be a finesse football team and win a lot of games, but I don't think that's what Carolina wants to be. You look at the best Belichick teams; they were physical, and they were able to wear down the opponent. This team wants to run the football. I know we're going to talk about the quarterback competition, and we everyone knows by now how we feel about that position. We want O'Neal to emerge as the guy because we like his arm. But this is going to be an offense that's going to want to run the ball, I would imagine, at 35, 40 times a game. I think they want to be a run first, run second, maybe pass third type of offense. That's only happening if you're winning up front, if you're generating holes, if you're giving lanes for these guys to run. And, yeah, you need to have your running backs that can make a guy miss, break a tackle. But you got to give them lanes to run to first before they can even do that aspect of it. So I think that's a big difference. Is you've got some player development. So you've brought some transfers in, you've coached them up. They've maybe taken that next step. But I just think across the board, and it starts there with Christo Kelly, there's just a commitment to being the most physical team that they can possibly be. And if that stuff carries over, man, then that's going to be then that's going to be hard for teams to deal with on a week in, week out basis. And if you have that identity now that you know going in, this is who we are, this is the type of offense we want to be, that bodes really well, because Carolina just quite simply never had that a year ago. And so if these two tackles are as good as they've been here in fall camp and in training camp, I think that bodes very well for this offense moving forward, because we've said all offseason we trust the interior a whole lot more than we trust the exterior. But if you can bring that group together and you've got a solid five that you know that they're going to go out there and they're going to do their job, then it makes life easier on whoever it is taking snaps under center or in shotgun.
Yeah, and the thing that's really important for this group is you just need to take a step forward from last year. We don't need all conference caliber players along the offensive line. I don't need one guy to earn all ACC recognition. Maybe honorable mention. Maybe that's what you would like to see for a guy like Banfield. But I don't need you to be next generation offensive lineman. I just need you to be solid enough to open up some running lanes, allow this team maybe average, close to 4.5 yards per rush. Really, you want to see these guys show up on early downs and get this team into certain situations that you weren't in a year ago, where it felt like, especially early in the season, there were so many 3rd and longs for Carolina early in the year. And a lot of that was due to the fact that they couldn't run the ball. And it felt like that even at the end of the year too, where Carolina just was not able to run the football, and it hurt them, because you were in situations where you needed Gio Lopez to have to throw the ball a little bit further downfield, and that just wasn't going to happen. That wasn't an area that he shined in. We'll see what it ultimately looks like when he's at Wake Forest, but that was just not his game when he was at Carolina. And so putting them in those 3rd and long situations, I just don't think that serves well. And I mean, you even go back, it's the successful quarterbacks that Carolina has had, Sam, Drake. You could say, well, a lot those guys could succeed in those long 3rd down situations. They could, but they weren't put in a lot of those situations because they had really good running games. They had Javonte Williams. They had Michael Carter. They had Ty Chandler, who I think is really underrated when you talk about that group. They had Amarian Hampton. This group, I think there is talent in this backfield. I don't think it was able to be showcased last year because I don't think the offensive line was really as good as it needed to be. And to the credit of the offensive line, it wasn't just all them. I don't think the tight ends were that great last year blocking wise. This year, it feels like they're going to be better. Everybody's talking about Jelani Thurman and the impact that he's going to make as a pass catcher. Some people think he might be the best catcher of the football on the entire roster this year, which is certainly something that you love to hear. But his blocking numbers at Ohio State were really good. Jordan Washington's 264 pounds when he gets back out there. Now, for him, we don't know what his timeline is. He's still not out on the practice field, so they could be without him early in the season, could get him back as the season goes along, and he can be effective there. And then Carson Snead, former offensive lineman that turned into a tight end. And, oh, by the way, brings some really good ability to catch the football too, on top of what he brings as a blocker. So I think they're going to be a better run blocking team this year. A little more cautious to say they're going to be a better pass protection team this year. I think that's something that we're going to have to wait and see. But one thing that I do like that we've heard is that you do have with Christo Kelly a real cerebral center, a guy that just understands the game, understands what he's seeing at the line of scrimmage. Not saying that Chad Lindbergh didn't understand that. Remember that when Chad Lindbergh came in and started at center last year, that was the first time that Chad Lindbergh had played center at the college level. And so he was having to adjust on the fly. This is not Christo Kelly's first time. Feels like there's a pretty good understanding of things. And so I think that is going to help whatever quarterback is back there. And I think it's going to help the rest of the offensive line as well. Running back room, not hearing anything different from what we heard after the first practice. Last week was really some talk about Jalen McGill having taken a step, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be a factor in that room. The starting running back when they take the field for the first drive in Dublin is going to be Benjamin Hall. He has made the strides this offseason. There's a feeling that he is going to be a much better player than he was a year ago, and maybe is going to show you why he ended up at Michigan coming out of high school. And I think that is more than welcome if that is what he is going to bring. If he can bring a little bit more explosiveness than he brought last year and isn't just necessarily a guy that's going to run in between the tackles, or if he just gets better blocking and just simply runs through guys, either way, that's going to work for Carolina, and I think he's going to be more productive. As down as I was on him last year, I'm feeling pretty good about what I'm hearing about him going into this year, that he has done the things that he's needed to do really throughout the offseason, but especially in summer and now fall camp, to be a guy that's going to be a major contributor. Damon June, I think one thing that people are probably wondering is, if he gets dropped to the second running back, is that sort of a bad look for him? No, I don't think so at all. I think you're going to need multiple running backs. I think he's embraced the competition. He got up and spoke to the media. I think it was it today, or he might have been last week? It was today that he got up there and spoke to the media. That tells me he's still seen as a valuable part of this team. It seems like he's a guy that's enjoying himself still. And I think another year in the system, a year to sort of adjust to what exactly they want him to be, which might be a little bit more explosive. That's a guy that I think could have a much better year this year. And so with those two guys leading the running back room, I'm feeling pretty confident, which is really good considering the news that we started off camp with, which was that Caleb Jackson, who was a standout back in the spring, probably not going to be much of a factor, definitely early on in the season, maybe if at all.
Yeah, and more importantly, I think you trust Petrino to know how to utilize both of these guys and maximize them. I don't think we'll have to come on here, even if Carolina, let's say, loses a game. I don't see us coming on here and complaining about carries for Hall or Damon June. And that happened last year with Damon June, where there was just times where he was just not given the football the way that the production warranted. He should have touched the ball. And I mentioned, I think this wants to be a run first football team. And so I think you're going to utilize both backs. I think you could maybe have two backs that they maybe neither one cracks 1,000, but if they can both crack 800 yards. I think that could be really solid production for both of these guys. If Benjamin Hall is the player that we're being told he is, you got to give him, I think, just a ton of credit for making the changes, I think, to his body to become the type of running back that could be a lead back, because the guy that you saw last year, like, to me, was like a third down back, like was never a guy that I thought I would want to trust him to touch the ball 15 to 20 times. But it appears he's a lot more explosive, a lot more dynamic, has the ability to make a guy miss, also has the ability to run away from you. Not just someone that's going to be like 3 yards in a cloud of dust, which is kind of what a lot of the Michigan backs traditionally that went there under Harbaugh were. So got to just give him, I think, a ton of credit, but also probably proof and evidence that some of these guys that they recruited last year, they needed to stay in the program to become the type of football players that they envisioned when they brought them in, to get them, a full, 16, 18 months in their weight and conditioning program. And I think he's a guy that, if he's taking that step, that's something that won't get talked about enough, but would be a real sign of growth from inside the building over there at the Kenan Football Center. So we're getting really excited about this team's ability to run the football. I think that's the best way for this offense to operate. I think they want to be a little bit more like ball control, kind of. I think they want to dominate time and possession more so than what we've seen here in recent past. And regardless of if Carolina can run it with these two guys, it makes the job easier for the quarterback. It also makes that job easier for those wide receivers because all of a sudden you're going to start walking these safeties down. You'll be able to start sucking them in on some play action pass, and maybe it makes it easier for some of these guys that have potential in that wide receiver room to emerge as a big play pass catchers.
I think they want to do both. They want to be an offense that at times can control the clock, can drain some time, can hold on to the ball for a little while and convert a long drive. 12, 13 play drive. I think they also want to be more explosive than they were last year and create some of those drives where you are able to get the defense back on the field immediately because you just had a 2-play drive, a 3-play drive. And I think what's different, because people will say, and I forget which podcast it was. I think it was the Tar Heel 24/7, the Heel Report. When they brought it up, Phil Longo was very, very, his mindset was pretty much focused on let's be as explosive as possible. If he could make every offensive drive a 1-play drive, Phil Longo wanted to do that. The thing was, I don't know if you had a defense that could handle that. What we saw from this defense last year, and especially, and this is one thing that I give the Belichick regime a lot of credit for, that Mac Brown always talked about but never did. The regime last year, they rotated a lot of guys defensively. There were fresh guys on the field, and there didn't seem to be nearly as much drop-off. Now, you could say, well, was that because there really wasn't that much talent? The results would tell you that's not the case. Carolina had some talent on the defensive side of the ball. It was just offensively, that was where you saw the biggest talent gap. So I think that they're going to probably be able to rotate again at a pretty decent rate for the most part. I think there's some areas, especially early in the season, D-tackle, I wonder about, linebacker, I wonder about. But as the season goes along, maybe you start to see other guys emerge there and they do start to rotate a little bit more. You could use some of those explosive drives where you hit a deep pass to Mason Humphrey and all of a sudden a game just gets completely flipped because of a 2-play drive from Carolina. And they're, if they're out of a game, they're right back in it. If they're tied in a game, they're in front. I think that's what you're looking for from Carolina this year, is that healthy balance of ball control and explosiveness. And I think you're going to see that from Bobby Petrino. I think he understands that. And I think they've got quarterbacks that should be able to do that. And that's where I think we got to turn next, because wide receiver depth chart's pretty much set there. It feels like Ship, Humphrey, Kekauna, those are going to be your guys when they roll out in Ireland. Those are going to be the guys that you're going to see a lot of in Ireland. You might see a little Nathan Leacock. You might see one of the true freshmen maybe get an opportunity at some point, like, let's say, a CJ Sadler, because he just has tremendous speed and athleticism that they might want to show off. Carnell Warren was a guy that had moments in the spring, but we haven't heard really anything about him here in fall camp. So I think you're pretty much going to be set at the wide receiver positions. Now you get to what's going to drive the passing game, and that is your quarterbacks. The position battle that everybody's been waiting for us to talk about. And I wrote in the article, and this was before we got the reports today, that things are status quo as they've been the entire fall camp. Miles O'Neill's taking the snaps with the ones. And when the first practice happened, I'm right on the page with you don't have to put any stock in that. We're 3 weeks in, and he's still taking the first snaps at quarterback. From what the Heel report said, from what sources told them, he started the scrimmage the other night on Saturday. So that would tell me that he's at the least, he is the guy that they want to be the starter in Dublin because they feel like he probably brings the offense the most upside. That's the direction that they want things to go, if not in that opener, at some point during the season. But you still have heard biggest things with him are decision making and accuracy. He's a guy that has had some issues with overthrows. The team as a whole, the quarterback room as a whole has had issues with that. But it feels like that's an area where he's got to get a little bit better. He's got to make the right decisions. Things might still be moving a little bit fast for him just because he doesn't have the experience that Billy Edwards Jr. does. He brings this offense more upside, but how do you look at that? How do you compare that to Billy Edwards, who might give you a better chance to win the game in the opener? I think, though, as they go along, it's getting harder and harder for me to still stay on Billy Edwards' train that he's going to be the guy that's going to start the opener. I wrote in the article the other night, I still think Edwards is the guy just because of the experience. The fact that we're still seeing Miles out there today taking the snaps with the ones, starting to think that I might have to change my opinion on that, especially if we get a report next week that Miles is still the guy that's the first guy taking snaps.
So here is the way that I look at this as someone that predicted Billy Edwards would start the game against TCU. When we came back, we would know that Miles O'Neill is our quarterback, which could still very well be what happens, right? If we just look at this from a cynical point of view, where Bill Belichick and the message inside the building is 2027 is our compete year. Like that's the year that we're building towards. We want to win 8, maybe 9 games, right? And there's not any fear for his job security this year, no matter what the wins, no matter what the losses may look like. I'm willing to grow during the year with Miles O'Neill as my quarterback. Like understanding that, yeah, Billy Edwards might give you a better chance to maybe win week 1. But is he the guy that maybe gives you the best chance to win in week 7, week 8? Maybe not, because I do think that O'Neill just fits this offense when you think about what the Petrino offense wants to be at full strength, where I think they're running the ball, you're getting some play action pass, you're being able to push the football vertically down the field. I do think that Miles O'Neill is the best version of that. But I do think that you also have to understand he's maybe going to throw an interception or 2 that might change the potential outcome of the game. So that's kind of where I find myself kind of thinking, is if we're building towards next year and there's confidence inside the building that Petrino's not going anywhere, that they could retain Miles O'Neill from an NIL perspective and a financial compensation standpoint, and you've got some guys that you brought in the portal that could be back next year, well, I think I'm open-minded to letting this offense kind of grow and develop with that young quarterback. That way next year, you enter spring, you enter fall camp, and you're building off what he did the past year, and you could hit the ground running. Now, if it's not that and it's the other way around and we don't know how they feel, then I could maybe see why you play Billy Edwards if he does give you a better chance out of the gate with this tough schedule to either win a game or 2 that you probably don't expect to win, be at the minimum, be more competitive in games where, quite frankly, the national media expects you to get blown out. But regardless, I think you see Miles O'Neal play against TCU. I think you see him play significant snaps, and I'll stick by what I've said all offseason long. I think win, lose, or draw, no matter what happens, when that team returns from Ireland, they'll know that Miles O'Neal is their starting quarterback going into the home opener.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the way that it ends up going. I'm feeling like it's trending in that direction, that as long as he doesn't start turning the ball over at a higher rate than he is right now, if he can limit it to one interception, you're probably feeling decent about where he's at. I mean, look at Josh Hoover, for example, the quarterback that you played last year in the game against TCU. Josh Hoover threw 13 picks a year ago. You can still be an effective quarterback if you throw interceptions, but can you outweigh the interceptions that you're throwing? That's going to be the important thing for Miles O'Neal if those turnovers are going to be there. Or you just lock in and you are more accurate early on in the season. And maybe once you get out there, but your defense doesn't have as good of a read on you, maybe that will help him. But I think when Belichick said earlier today, he was talking about how important decision-making is. And when we talk decision-making, it's simple stuff like just throwing an incompletion instead of throwing that interception. Saying, you know what, I'm going to put one into the dirt instead of let me try to float one down the middle of the field and it sails over my receiver's head and it gets intercepted by a safety. And all of a sudden that's a game-changing play. That's what they're trying to avoid, is those game-changing plays that, you know, could be backbreakers in certain scenarios for Carolina. The thing that's interesting to me and what I wonder the most, and I haven't heard as much about where Miles O'Neal is at. We've heard the big arm and everything like that. We've just heard overall inaccuracies. Is he a guy that is struggling with accuracy in the short passing game, in the intermediate passing game? Because if he's struggling in those areas, then that might be when you turn where you decide, you know what, we're going with Billy Edwards. Because from what I've heard about Billy Edwards, I don't think he necessarily struggles in those areas. If he does, it's not nearly as much as the other guys. His struggle is going to be he just can't drive the football down the field. Athletically, he's not as gifted as these other guys. And so I think that's where you're wondering. But from a processing standpoint, I do think that Edwards is probably ahead of these two guys. It really just comes down to how much can you put up with as the offensive coordinator, Bobby Petrino, and the head coach, Bill Belichick, with some of the inaccuracies that you're going to see. Because when we saw it, with Jacoby Criswell, Jacoby wasn't the most accurate guy across the board consistently, but we saw moments where he was a little bit more accurate, was able to hit some of those passes down the field. If that's the type of guy that Miles O'Neal can be, and you're telling me he's on that level, then I'm probably starting Miles O'Neal. Because I'm a guy that felt like Jacoby Criswell's play was better than I think you thought. Just judging off of like some of the comments that we've made over the past 2 years since Jacoby left. I would be okay with that, especially in the first game of the season as we progress. Now, the thing that's interesting is if it stays at that level, if the turnovers continue for Miles O'Neal, then do you potentially turn to Travis Burgess? This is another very interesting development. Haven't heard a ton about a lot of the true freshmen here in the fall. The one guy that we have heard a lot about is Travis Burgess, fully healthy, and now is starting to make strides. So much so that I think if he was healthy back in the spring, there's a legitimate chance that this is Miles O'Neal and Travis Burgess battling for the starting job. But I just think, and somebody asked me this yesterday or the day before, and I forgot to answer it on Twitter. Terrible with that. You know that. It's just as simple as if the injury wasn't as severe as it was last year, he might have been the starter for Carolina out of the gate. The reason that you don't roll with him out of the gate, as Justin Lundy, who is commenting here, asks, the reason you don't roll with him in the first game of the season, even if you're looking towards next year, is you don't want to put a guy out there in a scenario that he's not ready for and potentially damage him, ruin his mindset, just throw his confidence off that much where it's not something you can get back on track this season, and it could scar him moving forward. You don't want that to happen. Now, is there a point later in the season where he could be the guy that Carolina ultimately turns to and they say, hey, it's possible. I hate to say it. We're 1-5. We're going to throw you out there. We're 2-4. We're going to throw you out there. Yeah, I think that's definitely in play, especially if Miles O'Neill is turning the ball over at a high rate. If they are using Billy Edwards and Billy Edwards is really struggling to drive the ball down the field and the offense is stalling, I think then, yeah, you will get a legit push for Travis Burgess to get that job. And I think everything that we're hearing is that the talent is there. I'm not ready to say with what is being said that he's in Sam Drake territory, but it does feel like he's nearing that area and that eventually he could be there. So I think you want to slow play it, make sure that Travis is ready for whatever situation you're going to throw him into. But I could see October, maybe even November. They wait until really late in the season when if they're out of bowl contention and they can't make a bowl game, they say, you know what, we're turning to Travis Burgess. We're going to ride it out here, and he's going to be our guy moving forward. I would not hate that scenario.
I wouldn't hate that either. It does feel like at a minimum, there could be some sort of red zone package, whatever, where they find a way to just get him on the football field and utilize his ability, utilize his capabilities. Because as of this moment right now, I think I'm kind of where you are. To me, Billy Edwards may have been only recruited in the portal really as starter insurance because they didn't know where Travis Burgess was going to be in his injury rehab. And you wanted to go bring a vet in to maybe battle for the job, because there could be a scenario where you mentioned we get to October, we get to November, we're not in bowl contention. Your Billy Edwards is maybe your third quarterback on your depth chart, where it's Miles O'Neill, it's Travis Burgess, and maybe both guys are seeing some sort of playing time. I do think that, you know, he fits a lot of what Petrino's offense is kind of molded into with the dual threat ability. I think he's a much better passer than maybe he gets credit for. And I think in true totality, where I mentioned, like, I'm willing to let O'Neill grow for next year. The future of this room, if you want to project, is with Travis Burgess being Carolina's quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to bank on that because of the transactional climate we live in, where all these dudes are basically on 1-year deals. But internally, when Belichick and the coaching staff, they're recruiting and they're trying to figure out offensive linemen and what the offense looks like. They're trying to find players and pieces to fit around Travis Burgess, because that's the guy that you expect to be the quarterback, over the next handful of years. And so I can tell you, just having some interactions with him and his father on social media, like an easy kid to root for. Like I'm excited about what his future in Chapel Hill can be, because you're right. Is he Sam Howell? Is he Drake May? I don't know if he's that. Could he be a nice blend of maybe what Mitch Trubisky and Marquise Williams were were for Carolina, which when they came through, those were really highly productive dudes that engineered good offensive for Carolina that gave us memorable wins. Absolutely. And we would have complained about that level of quarterback play if we get a mixture of that sooner rather than later. So I think the quarterback room, kind of as it sits right now, man, you don't know who your clear-cut starter is going into the opener. But I do think this room, the upside of this room, is in a much better spot today than it was this time a year ago.
Yes. The four guys that are in that room, and this has been hammered home from the spring now into fall camp, the four guys in the room are all better than what you had last year at this time. Maybe at the end of the season, you would give Gio a little bit of an edge because there were some good moments from him. Give him an edge over some of the guys. In most people's minds, this group is so far ahead of where they were last year, and it's going to give Carolina a chance to win more games. And that's ultimately what we're looking for out of this group. You know, to me, I still think there is a legitimate battle going on here. I don't think that they thought of Billy Edwards as just a guy that's coming in as insurance for Burgess. I think they legitimately thought that he was a guy that would be able to compete. I wonder if his injury sort of lingering in the spring maybe hurt him a little bit, because that PCL was not fully healed from what people were from what the guys closer to the team are saying. Wasn't fully healed back in the spring. He was still limited by that. And so now you're starting to see that. And one area that he does hold an advantage is he is a little bit more athletic. I think if you're wanting to run the football with your quarterback, which is something that we've seen Bobby Petrino do before, Billy Edwards is probably your guy. Miles O'Neill, I think, is a better athlete than people probably realize. But if you're looking for a legit running threat at the quarterback position, if you're looking for someone that can probably make the off-platform throws right now, that's probably Billy Edwards. And so that's what's going to make it really interesting. I still think that I would imagine, I don't know exactly, but I would imagine they're going to have another scrimmage before the end of training camp, before the end of the period where they're really looking to compete. Now, we've said it, this competition could go into that portion where they're still, we're still preparing for TCU. It could still be raging on. Hell, it could go into the first game of the season. But I'm starting to feel like that's probably not the way they're going to lean. I think they will have a definitive starter. They will give that guy, if not the entire game, they're going to give that guy a pretty long leash, unless things just get really bad where you're talking about whoever it is coming in, turning the ball over 3 times, and then you have to just yank that quarterback and go to the other one. I think whoever they go with, they're going to give a legitimate chance to start and hold on to it for a little bit. But yeah, as I said, with everything that's coming out, with the fact that O'Neill appears to have started that first scrimmage as well, and the fact that he's running with the ones, I do think he's probably going to be the guy. The good thing is, across the board, one thing that Inside Carolina said about today, much more accurate day from everybody. Now, they weren't running nearly as deep of patterns as they were when they got to view them last week, but they did say that the accuracy and not a lot of overthrows. Seems like that's something that maybe they've adjusted a little bit. And so hopefully that's a trend that continues here over the next week or so, and then eventually into their preparations for the game against TCU. So yeah, a lot of really good stuff. Credit to those guys over there at Inside Carolina and Tar Heel 24/7, who have done a great job covering camp and everything like that. It's been fun to react to what we've been hearing. I think there's one more media availability for camp. And so Not sure which day. When I was sent the original dates, it was supposed to be Wednesday of each week after the first practice, which was open, which was on Thursday. This one was, of course, today, Friday. So we'll see what day next week they ultimately open up practice to the media. But I don't know how much is really going to change. But if there is anything, we'll, of course, give you our reactions to that next week. It's been really fun taking you throughout fall camp, where we've gotten even more than we did back in the spring, and starting to understand what this team is going to look like in the first week against the Horned Frogs of TCU. We're going to have you covered on all that stuff here on both the website, HeelToughBlog.com, and on the podcast side of things. Things are going to be pretty busy here over the next couple of weeks, because this coming week, this is where we got to start getting into our bold predictions for the season, our breakout players for the season. Those kind of things are going to be coming up. We're still efforting getting some guests on. It looks like some of the preseason magazine writers that might not be trending in the right direction. They're starting to wrap up a lot of their preseason availability. And so, unfortunately, I think I just dropped the ball reaching out late to those guys. But there was a lot of stuff that was going on, with the football program that still was keeping us doing podcasts and everything like that. So I think, it sucks, but it is what it is. But there are going to be some other people that we're going to reach out to, see if we can get them on as well. So there will be podcast episodes flowing for you guys. And it's the same thing on the website. The breakout players will be an article for you guys to be able to read. The bold predictions will be an article for you guys to be able to read. And then, any other news and notes that come out from around practice will also be something that we will be touching on for sure over there on HeelToughBlog.com. Any watch lists that guys land on, we did have Peyton Seelman land on the Butkus Award watch list, which isn't nothing, guys. Only 51 players, only 51 linebackers land on that list. And so for him to be a guy that lands on there, that's something significant. There's a few other guys. Milcart has received some preseason honors. Jordan Shipp received the All-State Werfel Trophy watch list recognition as a guy that, does it on the field, but also in the community, in the classroom. So that was really cool. Go back and read that article. Jelani Thurman also being talked about, for the Mackey Award as a watch list candidate there. So, yes, that is certainly, some nice awards for guys to be landing on. And I think shows you talent is a little bit ahead of where it was last year. Didn't feel like we were talking about a lot of guys landing on preseason watch list a year ago. So, we'll keep you up to date on all of that kind of stuff over there on HeelToughBlog.com. The other reason why you want to go over there is the basketball side of things. Guys, this offseason is it's never ending for football or basketball. Basketball, especially with the ruling that came down in the state of Colorado, felt like that was the sport that was affected the most out of the two big ones. And you've seen that Seth Trimble has decided to return to college. He's going to go to Louisville. There's an article up on the website about that. There's also, the article that you can go back and read on Cameron Fens, Carolina's last addition to their roster for this upcoming season. Go back and read that. Any other news that comes out around the program here as we go through the offseason, still awaiting some news on the Sean Cada front. Alexandra Summerdurov, same thing. So if we get any news like that, we'll be talking about that on the website. And of course, over on the Four Corners podcast page as well. The good news is that if you're following us on social media at Heel Tough Blog on either Twitter or Facebook, you will get those podcast editions in the same place and the same place that you'll get those articles. Same thing if you're over on the YouTube channel. That really is the best place to be, guys. Go over there, subscribe for us. We would greatly appreciate it. We're trying to get to 1,000 before the season starts. And if we can get there, it would be huge for us and would help both podcasts. And that's the thing, is when you subscribe, You'll be notified when we go live with either podcast because it's all in one central location. So make sure you guys go over there and do that for us. And we're looking forward to bringing you plenty more content here over the next handful of months. This is going to be our busy time of the year. We're getting it cranked back up again, and we're really excited for that. Anything else? I think we're pretty much good on that. Social medias, everything, head over there and give us a follow. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.